Johnny Somali, whose real name is Ramzi Khalid Ismail, is an American IRL streamer known for his provocative antics and disrespectful stunts abroad. In late 2024, his behavior in South Korea landed him in legal trouble, and he's been stuck there facing multiple charges. Now, as of the past few days, there's a significant update. Prosecutors dropped the child-related charges against him. But Johnny isn't off the hook. He still faces other serious charges, with a court date set for May 16, 2025, that could see him behind bars in Korea. Let's break down exactly what's happening, including the drop charges, the remaining charges like an AI deepfake scandal and causing public panic, and even the role of Johnny's outspoken friend Hank Yoo, who has his own controversial history.
But guess what he just did?
Johnny Somali had been under investigation for child sexual harassment in connection with a live stream at Lot World, a Seoul amusement park, where he used a text-to-speech program to broadcast lewd, sexually explicit messages in the presence of children. This led authorities to consider charging him under South Korea's Child Welfare Act, which outlaws sexual harassment of minors. Conviction under that law is no joke. It can mean up to 10 years in prison or a fine up to 50 million won, roughly $34,000. For a while, it looked like Johnny might face these child welfare charges on top of his other offenses. However, in a surprising turn of events, all child-related charges have been dropped by prosecutors. Johnny himself announced this on April 30th, posting a screenshot of the official notice from the prosecutor's office and triumphantly writing, "All child welfare charges against me have been dropped by South Korean prosecutors." He even took the opportunity to lash out at his critics, calling fake news media, gossip YouTubers, and wannabe journalists liars for spreading the initial reports. The reason behind the drop is reportedly insufficient evidence. In other words, Korean prosecutors decided they couldn't prove that Johnny's actions met the legal standard for child sexual harassment. Perhaps because no specific minor victim was identified or there wasn't enough proof a child felt harmed or sexually ashamed by the stunt, which is the key criterion under the Child Welfare Act's sexual harassment clause. Without solid evidence or testimony from an affected minor, the case under that law couldn't move forward. So, as of now, Johnny is no longer facing charges related to the welfare of children. It's worth noting that this doesn't erase the incident from public memory. The TTS at the theme park stunt still enraged many in South Korea and contributed to Johnny's infamy. But legally, Johnny won't be prosecuted for the Lotta World child harassment episode. Dropping these particular charges may indicate prosecutors are focusing their efforts on the stronger charges against Johnny, ones they have more evidence to back up. And indeed, several other charges are still very much on the table, including a new charge that has potentially guaranteed prison time if he's found guilty. Let's look at those next. Even with the child-related accusations off the table, Johnny Somali is still facing a slew of other charges in South Korea. In total, prosecutors have 5 charges against him: obstruction of business, 2 counts, stemming from disruptive pranks, such as an October 2024 convenience store incident, where he argued with staff and even spilled instant noodles intentionally, interrupting the store's operations. Essentially, he's accused of interfering with businesses through his antics. Violations of the Minor Offenses Act, 2 counts. These are lesser public order offenses. In Johnny's case, they include things like public disturbances. For example, he blasted loud music and danced on public transport and waved around a bag of rotten fish in public, causing discomfort and public anxiety among bystanders. Such behavior falls under Korea's minor crimes and petty offenses law. Violation of the Special Act on Sexual Violence Crimes, 1 count. This is the new AI deepfake charge, and it's the most serious. Johnny allegedly created and distributed a pornographic deepfake video featuring a popular female Korean streamer known as Bong Bong in an explicit fake scene with himself. This kind of act making sexual images of someone without consent using AI is classified as a sex crime under Korean law. Johnny already pleaded guilty to 3 of the earlier charges, 1 of the business obstruction counts and the 2 minor offenses, during a March 7, 2025 hearing. He notably showed up an hour late to that hearing, wearing a MAGA hat and allegedly still hungover, but did admit to those 3 charges in court. The remaining charges, presumably the second obstruction count and the big deepfake charge he has not pled guilty to, so those are being contested in court. The next court date is scheduled for May 16, 2025, which is expected to be a final trial hearing and possible sentencing date. This date was initially set for April, but got delayed at the request of Johnny's lawyer, his public defender. May 16th is when we'll likely see the Korean court address the AI deepfake charge and any unresolved charges. Given the seriousness of the deepfake incident, many observers believe Johnny is almost certain to receive a prison sentence at that hearing. What penalties could Johnny face? Under South Korea's laws, the AI deepfake charge alone carries a mandatory prison term. There is no option for a fine for this offense, due to its gravity. A legal expert noted that distributing sexually explicit AI content without consent is explicitly illegal. And because Johnny's deepfake was of a sexual nature, it qualifies as a sex crime. The penalty can be up to 7 years in prison under the Special Act on Sexual Violence. In short, if he's convicted on the deepfake charge, some amount of jail time is virtually guaranteed. The other charges, obstruction of business and the minor offenses, are less severe, typically punishable by fines or shorter jail terms. Johnny might have gotten away with just fines or a suspended sentence for those minor charges alone, but the deepfake changes the game. South Korean legal analysts have pointed out that Johnny's chances of avoiding jail are now slim to none, especially after the addition of the deepfake charge. The consensus is that he will likely serve time in a South Korean prison, and after serving his sentence, he will be deported from Korea and banned from returning. Korean law allows deportation of foreigners after criminal sentences, and immigration experts note that any conviction with a fine over 3 million won will trigger an expulsion order. Johnny's penalties will almost certainly exceed that threshold. In fact, Johnny himself seems to anticipate a prison term. He's been trying to raise money and even at one point begged for help as his legal fees mounted and a jail sentence loomed. So, heading into the May 16th court date, Johnny Somali is facing likely incarceration. If the court finds him guilty on the deepfake and remaining obstruction charge, we could see a multi-year prison sentence handed down. After that, Korean authorities would hold him for the duration of his sentence. Some have estimated anywhere from 1 to 5+ years, depending on how the judge weighs the charges. Once released, he'd be promptly deported back to the United States, and likely blacklisted from re-entering South Korea in the future. In other words, Johnny's controversial Asia streaming adventure is poised to end with him serving time in Korea, then being kicked out of the country. While navigating his legal woes abroad, Johnny Somali isn't completely alone. He's had the support of a rather infamous friend, Hyunjong Hank Yoo. If you haven't heard of Hank Yoo, here's what you need to know. Hank is a Korean American with a wild backstory. In U.S. internet circles, he's actually known as the Asian Nazi for his past antics of dressing in Confederate uniforms, spouting far-right rhetoric, and even saluting Hitler in videos. Hank grew up in Texas, but his life went off the rails due to criminal behavior. In 2018, he was convicted on multiple federal charges in Tyler, Texas for firearms violations, 7 counts of lying about being a U.S. citizen to buy guns, and 1 count of unlawfully possessing guns as a prohibited person. It turned out Hank had a history of mental health institutionalizations, which made it illegal for him to own firearms, but he was buying them anyway by falsely claiming U.S. citizenship and other lies. A judge sentenced him to 97 months over 8 years in federal prison, and crucially, ordered that he be deported from the U.S. after serving his sentence. Hank Yoo ultimately was deported to South Korea in 2020. Since he was a South Korean national and only a legal resident in the U.S. back in Korea, Hank has no official job and reportedly lives off his wealthy family support. Despite being Korean by birth, Hank doesn't exactly have warm feelings towards his motherland. In fact, he's made a slew of derogatory statements about South Korea and the Korean language since his return. In recent online rants, Hank insulted Korea and Koreans, at one point even proclaiming that the Korean language is a disgusting language. Such comments have understandably outraged many Koreans. It's ironic and sad, because as a Korean American, Hank directing this level of disdain at his own heritage makes him come off as, in the words of one commenter, a race traitor or a self-hating Korean. Despite Hank Yoo's abrasive views on Korea, he has been Johnny Somali's loudest. and perhaps only supporter in South Korea. The two men connected sometime after Hank's deportation and Johnny's arrival in Seoul. Hank even let Johnny move into his apartment in Seoul. According to reports, Johnny has been staying with Hank, who was basically the only person willing to associate with him while most others shunned Johnny. Hank has actively supported Johnny's trolling activities and legal fight. He frequently posts on social media in support of Johnny, and has solicited donations from the public to help pay Johnny's mounting legal fees, citing Johnny's dire financial situation due to being banned on streaming platforms. Essentially, Hank became Johnny's roommate, benefactor, and PR man all in one, trying to rally sympathy, or at least money, for his friend. However, Hank's involvement has arguably been a double-edged sword for Johnny. On one hand, Hank gave Johnny a place to crash and a fellow mischief maker to hang with. On the other hand, Hank's own volatile behavior and extreme statements probably only worsen public opinion of Johnny by association. For instance, Hank's anti-Korea tirades, like the disgusting language remark, have drawn backlash, and he has publicly mocked South Korea's legal system and culture while defending Johnny. In one instance, Hank and Johnny together even praised China's government while bashing South Korea, seemingly to troll Korean viewers and paint Korea as a U.S. puppet state rhetoric that mirrors some of Johnny's own offensive comments. Johnny at one point called South Korea a U.S. vassal state. Hank's contempt for Korean authority is clear, and he has encouraged Johnny to push back aggressively. There are even reports that Hank tried to meddle in Johnny's court case, for example, by advising Johnny to demand a delay to hire a private lawyer, and generally feeding Johnny the idea that Korean law is flawed compared to U.S. law. Needless to say, none of this endeared either of them to the Korean public or judges. Regarding Hank Yoo's own legal status, since he's a South Korean citizen now living in Korea, he isn't at risk of deportation from Korea. A country generally can't deport its own citizens. But his immigration consequences have already played out in the U.S. He was permanently expelled from the United States as a felon. After serving about 5 years of his 8-year sentence, accounting for good behavior credit, Hank was handed over to ICE and flown to Seoul. Because of his deportation, Hank cannot return to the U.S. without special permission, likely for the rest of his life. In Korea, if Hank were to commit any crimes, he'd be subject to Korean law, and given his history and outspoken antics, Korean authorities are probably keeping an eye on him. So far, aside from being punched on the street a couple of times by locals fed up with their behavior, Hank hasn't had new legal troubles in Korea. He's mainly active online, where he continues to spew hate towards Korea while paradoxically living in it and helping Johnny. In summary, Hank Yoo is a peculiar figure in this saga, a deported Korean-American ex-convict who has become Johnny Somali's ally, advocate, and sidekick. He provides Johnny with shelter and support, but also brings even more controversy with his own past and his offensive statements about Korea. Hank's public support might be doing Johnny more harm than good in the court of public opinion. Nevertheless, Hank seems committed to sticking by Johnny, at least as long as Johnny is in Korea. Hank has indicated he'll continue fighting for Johnny's cause, even threatening to sue those he says defamed Johnny regarding the child charges, and will presumably be present at Johnny's court date to show support.
Insufficient evidence.
As of this week, the Johnny Somali drama in South Korea has reached a critical point. The child welfare, child sexual harassment charges were dropped due to lack of evidence, which is a small win for Johnny. But he is still facing serious charges, especially the AI deepfake pornography charge, which all but guarantees he'll see prison time if convicted. With his sentencing hearing set for May 16, 2025, Johnny's fate will soon be sealed by the Korean courts. Given the remaining charges, legal experts expect a prison sentence followed by deportation and a ban from South Korea. Throughout all this, Johnny's friend Hank Yoo has been loudly in his corner, attacking South Korea's reputation in the process and reminding everyone of his own notorious past. It's a bizarre situation, an American streamer and a deported Korean American, both with checkered histories stirring up international incidents. For now, all eyes and a lot of cameras will be on the Seoul courtroom on May 16th. Will the judge make an example of Johnny Somali to deter other troublemaking streamers? What will happen to Hank Yoo once his buddy is likely sent to prison or kicked out of the country? Will he fade back into obscurity or continue to incite controversy in Korea? These are the questions on the minds of those following this case. One thing's for sure, Johnny Somali's IRL streaming career in Asia has devolved into a real-life lesson. Actions have consequences, and in South Korea, those consequences are coming due in the form of legal justice. Thank you as always to Legal Mindset and his genius analysis on our favorite trash troll RKI.